Let's start with international arrival caps. Queensland will request that the Commonwealth cuts back. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews is calling for a 50% reduction. WA also following suit. Is it time to look at cutting back on international arrivals temporarily while we are dealing with the Delta strain?
Good morning, Danica. New South Wales has processed 4 times the number of overseas arrivals as Victoria. And Victorians have spent 173 days in lockdown compared with New South Wales at 40 odd. So I think it's a bit rich for Daniel Andrews to be demanding that Victoria essentially not carry its fair share of the load. I might also add that Daniel Andrews has been boasting that it was his idea to quarantine returned Australians in hotels. Now, it was Andrews' idea. He boasted that he took it to National Cabinet. Australians actually have a right to come home. And I just think it's so unfair that because Daniel Andrews can't manage hotel quarantine, don't remember, he said it was the gold standard which he still hasn't learnt the lessons from for the debacles of last year and earlier this year. And Australians who want to return home are going to be punished because of the incompetence of Daniel Andrews.
Well, right now we only have one purpose-built facility for hotel quarantine. Given the leaks we are seeing, and while some are being built, is hotel quarantine the answer?
Well, it's part of the answer. It's part of the solution. I think having a purpose-built facility like Howard Springs in the Northern Territory that's worked very well is a very good idea. And I don't know why it's taken so long for the Victorian government, after promising back in March that it would be built, that it still hasn't been. So it's a perfectly good idea. But as the Prime Minister and as every leader has insisted around Australia, hotel quarantine will remain part of the program for the foreseeable future. So if the states seriously are suggesting that they can't manage this process in an effective and safe way, then heaven help us.
We've got a situation now, Tim Smith, where almost half of the Australian population is in a lockdown. When will the government provide a roadmap, a way forward on how we can shift the country away from restrictions?
That's a particularly good question, Danica. It's a question that I would, as a citizen, would very much like an answer to. I would love to know from the Victorian government in particular what their roadmap is, what their plan is
but what
post-COVID.
About the
Daniel Andrews
the federal
turned up.
government as well, though, Tim Smith. I mean, this is a national problem. We've got 7% of the population vaccinated fully at the moment.
Yes, it is a national problem. I don't doubt it, but it's a state health order restriction that is locking people at home. And Victorians have been locked down the most of all Australians by a country mile. Daniel Andrews returned to work on Monday with a PR plan for himself, but there is no plan post-COVID or indeed to manage COVID here in Victoria, with the exception of the sledgehammer approach of statewide lockdowns.
What's the figure then for when we might be able to look at a COVID normal across the country? The New South Wales Premier says 80% of the population has to be vaccinated before that conversation. Do you think that 80% is about on the mark?
Look, I think that's a perfectly reasonable suggestion by the New South Wales Premier. And I would like to see, again, what is the Victorian government's plan for ending ongoing... I mean, we had a so-called circuit breaker lockdown 6 weeks ago and still going. We still have restrictions here in Melbourne. So I ask again, what is the Andrews Labor government's plan here in Victoria to once and for all end restrictions? We can't keep living like this. I mean, what is their plan throughout this period of COVID and then post-COVID to get us back to normality?
But how much of how much does the vaccine rollout play in all this? As I said, more than almost half the population across the country now in lockdown, 7% fully vaccinated. Has the federal government moved too slow on its rollout?
I think you'll find that there has been some, how do I put this? There has been some unforeseen issues, for example, with AZ that has changed the dynamic, particularly with regards to the advice for Australians who are between the ages of 50 and 60. Equally, we had supply chain issues from Europe. So there has been some unforeseen supply and reaction issues with the AZ vaccine. But the honest answer is there's also been massive issues, for example, in Victorian vaccine hubs with getting a booking. So there has been massive problems on the ground in terms of the rollout. There have been supply chain issues too. But with 7 million doses, the nation is heading in the right direction. And I want to see as many jabs in as many Australian arms as humanly possible over the short to medium term.
Yep, absolutely. Fingers crossed. Tim Smith, we have to leave it there. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Danica.